welcome to the University of the West Indies Open Campus Public Lecture number 2. This lecture is surrounding the Garifuna history, pre-colonization, Garifuna resistance to colonization, and forced removal from St. Vincent. For your ceremony tonight, I am your program director, Miss Ronisha Gentle, and we will commence with the playing of the national anthem of Belize in both English and Garifuna.
Free by the Carib Sea, our manhood we pledge to thy liberty. No tyrants can linger, despots must flee this grand believing of democracy. The blood of our sires, which hollows the sun, brought freedom from slavery, oppression, run by the might of truth and the grace of God. No longer shall we be good for wood. Arise, ye sons of the David's land. Put on your armor, clear the land, drive back the tyrants, let despots flee. Land of the free, by the Carib Sea. Nature has blessed me with wealth untold, o'er mountains and valleys where prairies roll. Our fathers, the brave, valiant and bold, drove back the invaders as heritage gold. Proud Rio Hondo to old Saskatoon, through Coral Island over Blue Lagoon. Keep watch with the angels, the stars and moon, for freedom comes tomorrow soon. Arise, ye sons of the Baymen's land, put on your armor, clear the land, drive back the tyrants, let despots flee. Land of the free, by the Carib Sea.
Hagira libretia la rubaran, dua multiwere luba salvaru, merederu bayan, furuda dia ya, hey baloi wagira le daran dilabay, seti hata wayuna lehur memu, webe meriduwe adamuruli, laulu bafu iriche bugi wabar, mamudiru duduya diwaya sara, umahara tuiwayu lahu, dura umakules, ibicalamu, heba agandi. Agira libretinha la rumara, adewe habubuti faradi uo wa uburi wa mualeri sibe ayavi wa yunagu dere bubutia eba mutia anania mayawo Maria Rio Hondo da Galus Stone Lausua Modelu Malagulu Fekela Wabu Hamadiru Lumasye Chu Waguji Bungiu, Lida Song Fulas, Yubila, Baruwe Hawa, Aduguala, Lema Pusero, Lida Mua, Lida Song Fulas, Waguji Bungiu, Lida Song Fulas, Yubila, Baruwe Hawa, Aduguala, Lema Pusero, Lida Mua, Lida Sumfulas, Lida Mua, Lida Sumfulas. Waguchi Pungiu, Lina Sumfula, Yubila, Baruwe Hawa, Aduguala, Lema Busero, Lina Mua, Lina Sumfula, Lina Mua, Lina Sumfula. Itarana.
And that was the Our Father being recited in the language of the Garifuna, a very enticing and melodic language. And want to play along in English. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. And now, continuing with the program for tonight, we have the welcome by Dr. Charmaine Sanders, the head of the University of the West Indies Open Campus.
Good night, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight for our second lecture in the Public Lecture Series 2021. Tonight, the University of the West Indies Open Campus, Belize, is pleased to present the second public lecture for the year 2021. Our presenter for this second public lecture is Professor Wellington Ramos, an adjunct professor of history and political science. He is delivering his presentation entitled Garifuna History. This lecture is an important aspect in documenting our cultural history and identity. In 2021, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, declared Garifuna culture a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. In much the same way as various local marine areas, including several ranges of keys, were laterally classified as UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. Tonight, Professor Ramos coalesces both oral history and written history to share with us the Garifuna history. He has categorized his presentation into three key parts. Part one, pre-colonization. Part two, Garifuna resistance to colonization. And part three, forced removal from St. Vincent. The University of the West Indies Open Campus is additionally honored to officially launch today two of Professor Ramos's published books. One A History of the United Democratic Party, the UDP of Belize, History, Challenges, Success, and Transition, and his second book, A Proposed Constitution for a Garifuna Nation, Urume, Time to Access the Injustices Committed to our Garifuna People. Thank you, and we invite you to listen and be prepared to engage in rich discussion at the question and answer segment that follows. We promise shortly another upcoming public lecture in the public lecture series in May 2021 by Bishop Bengoshe on religion and the Garifuna people. Stay tuned for more information on this important lecture series. Good night.
Many thanks, Dr. Saunders, for those welcoming remarks. I now call on Mr. Felix Leslie, the Vice Chapter Chair of the UE Open Campus Guild, to come and present our speaker, well, our presenter for tonight, Professor Wellington Ramos. Mr. Leslie?
Hi, good night again, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Gentle, for that introduction. So tonight I am being honored to present to you the presenter of the night, Mr. Wellington Ramos. So Mr. Wellington Claude Ramos was born to one Josephine Sampson and Finley Ramos in Dangrigatong of Belize on March 11, 1955. He grew up with his grandfather, Mr. Simon M. Sampson, his mother and aunts, Apollonara Sampson and Patrona Sampson Velasquez, along with his siblings, Jean Norales, Henry Errol Norales, Felix Norales, Anthony Norales, and Elsa Enriquez. Also in his households, also in his household were two of his cousins, Claude Velasquez and Harold Sampson. He was enrolled in Sacred Heart Primary School in 1961 and graduated in 1969. At the school, he played football and won 2 consecutive primary school championships, playing the role of defense. From there, he attended Austin High School, but due to financial problems, was forced to leave school early to work. In 1971, he migrated to Belize City to live with his older brother, Errol Norales, who was in the Belize police force. While in Belize City, he found a job with the British force at their military base in the village of Ladyville, working as a maintenance worker. On April 23, 1973, he joined the Belize police force and went to the police training school for training. On October 19, 1973, after 6 months of training, he graduated third in his class out of a total of 40 recruits. He was assigned to patrol branch in Belize City. In November of 1974, he had his first child with Miss Shirley Middleton, and her name was Claudette. He was later transferred to the Criminal Investigation Branch that same year. In 1975, he was transferred to the Orange Walk Town, where he was assigned to the Criminal Investigation Office. In 1976, he took the Belize Police Force corporal examination and passed high among the top tier. He was then promoted to the rank of corporal and was placed in charge of the Criminal Investigation Branch in Orange Walk District. That same year, he had another daughter with his common law wife, and her name was Darlene Ramos. In 1977, he was transferred back to Belize City and then later to the NCO in Hattieville, Boroughboom, and Grace Rock villages. The same year, he got married to Sylvia Coffin, and from that wedding, he had his third daughter, Jareen Ramos. On the 14th of July, 1978, he migrated to the United States to visit relatives in New York City. He visited relatives in Detroit, Michigan, and was later enrolled in Wayne County Community College. In 1979, he returned back to New York City and enrolled in the New York City Technical College. where he received his Associates of Arts degree in 1983. He later continued his education at Hunter College, where he obtained his Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science and History with a minor in communication. He then started to work as a teacher assistant with the New York City Department of Education. In 1986, he left teaching, and was enrolled in the United States Army, where he completed his basic military training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and his advanced individual training at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indiana. He was then sent to Baumholder, Germany, to take on his military assignment with the 8th Infantry Division Mechanized until July of 1989. On his return from the military, he rejoined the New York City Department of Education and worked as an assistant teacher, teacher of social studies, and an attendance teacher. In January of 1994, he enrolled in Long Island University to pursue his master's degree in urban studies, and he graduated in September of 1995. After obtaining his master's degree, he did his postgraduate work in educational administration. In 2006, he was appointed as an adjunct professor at Broca College, and he began teaching many courses in the social science. These courses include early American history, contemporary American history, introduction to political science, early world history, modern world history, history of Western civilization, systems of society, introduction to writing, and other courses. From 2014 to 2017, he was appointed as an assistant to the Dean of Manhattan campus and assisted him with his administrative duties. Professor Ramos is also a journalist that have written and published 2 books, namely A Proposed Constitution for Our Garifuna Nation, Urume, and A History of the United Democratic Party in Belize. He has written over 200 articles on issues related to the Garifuna and Belizean people, on many political and historical issues. Some of his articles can be found in the Amandala, Caribbean Life, Caribbean News Now, Caribbean News Global, and many other news media. As a Garifuna activist since the early 1980s, he is the current president of the United Garifuna Association, Inc. Was one of the founders of the Garifuna Nation and former vice president. He is now the first vice president of the United States and advisor of the Garifuna Nation. Mr. Ramos was also a national football player in Belize, coached football teams in the United States and Germany. He played for Sacred Heart College. He played for Sacred Heart School, Austin High School, Police Invaders, Astros, Trial Farm, All Orange Walk Selection, Riverside 11, Cheetahs 11, Ubafu, Belway, US Army, Baumholder Germany, and several other teams. He is now the president of Belizean American Caribbean Football Association and the Belizean American Football Hall of Fame, 2 organizations he was one of the founder members. He is dedicated to the sport of football and is still actively involved in all aspects of the sport. His dream is to see Belize play in the World Cup. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Mr. Ramos a warm welcome as he presents for us tonight.
Good evening, Dr. Sanders, UWI staff, audience. It is indeed a great pleasure to be given this opportunity to talk about the history of my Garifuna people. After all the schooling that I have done, all the reading of books, and all the research material that I encountered, I must say to you that many things that have been written about my people are misleading, erroneous, and I would say fabricated. So we have a big challenge ahead. We must
come together and clarify all the erroneous things that were written. We must tell the truth, and we must rewrite the history. Tonight, I'm going to give you some information that I know you did not get in the schools that you attended, because in Belize, there was not much that was taught to me about my history. And everything that I know now, I had to do my own research, analyze all the books that I have read, and then come to some analytical conclusions. But why did this happen? It happened because we are living in a world of colonization. After the indigenous people land were taken away from them, and the nation states that they had in place before the Europeans came was totally destroyed. History tells us that many, many years ago, some people left the Orinoco region in South America, and they started traveling south to around Venezuela, and they landed in the Lesser Antilles. And they started moving upwards to the north, which is the Greater Antilles in the Caribbean. But those people that came first from that region, they were mostly Tainos. Some years after, another group from the same region took the same route, and they came and they occupied the Lesser Antilles. There was friction between these two groups, and the Tainos kept on moving north. And most of these people stayed in the southern part of the Caribbean. And those people are now known as the Kalinago people. The Kalinago people lived together on different islands, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada, all those islands they occupied. In each of their islands, they had a chief. They had a government. They ran their own communities by themselves. They also had an agreement, which is a treaty, that if they were attacked by any foreign nation, they would come together and they would fight for their land against foreign invaders. The Taino people and the Kalinago people were always living in peace, harmony among themselves. We know from history that there were some African traders coming to this part of the world during the days of Mali, which was one of the greatest empires in West Africa, by the way. And one king, Asker Mohammed, Mansa Musa, another king, they were sending people to this part of the world to do trade and exploration. Some of these people, they loved what they found and they never returned. And they decided to live on the island of St. Vincent, one group of them. There is evidence coming out that they had settled at other places. We have another group that lives in Nicaragua called the Mosquito Indians. They've been there for centuries. Anthropological and historical research that is being done in Mexico is finding that Africans were traveling to this part of the world many, many years before we ever thought about. And it makes a lot of sense because history has already proven that the first human beings on this planet Earth were Africans. Their remains were found by Dr. Leakey in Kenya, Old Dubai, George. They have found remains of Black people in places like Austria, Spain, and other parts of Europe. So there was traveling taking place. People are moving from one place to the next. There is a theory that was fabricated by the British that the Garifuna people derived from a slave ship that sunk off the coast of St. Vincent. Please, my friends, there is no evidence to substantiate that existed. And we need to stop saying it. I'll tell you why. The Africans that came to St. Vincent and lived among the Kalinago Indians came long before 1800s. That's one reason. Another reason is anthropological work has been done on the island of St. Vincent. And they don't want to disclose all the information they have, but Black people have been there. When Columbus landed in the Bahamas in 1492, he met the Taino Indians, and they told Columbus, look, there are some Black people living in the South with some other Indians. Please don't go to that island because they're very fast fighters, and they are going to drive you and your people off that island. Because there was friction going on between the Kalinago, the Garifuna, and the Tainos back and forth, and they couldn't win. They were just warriors. And the Spanish made an attempt to take the island of St. Vincent in 1498, and they were driven off the island. The Spanish reported in their memoirs that there were Black people on the island of St. Vincent in 1498. The first real encounter between Europeans and Black people on the island of St. Vincent came in 1640. What happened in 1640 was that the French invaded Martinique, and they killed most of the native Indians on the island of Martinique. When they invaded Martinique, they had some Catholic priests with them. And the Catholic priests were divided in two groups, the Jesuits and the Dominican priests. And they made a bet among themselves that whichever group reaches the adjacent island, the island will be named after them. So the Dominican priests reached the other island, and they call that island up to today Dominica. But Dominican Kalinago Indians did not give up their islands like that. They fought viciously against the French. The French were able to put and leave some troops there, and then the next trip was to come to the other island which we live, known as Urume. Urume is the original name of St. Vincent. How did the name St. Vincent came about? Well, history that they wrote said that in the month of January in 1498, Columbus visited the island of St. Vincent, and in the Catholic feast day, because it was the feast of St. Vincent, the island was named St. Vincent. So the original name of Urume was not mentioned no more. However, all the Garifuna people that live in the diaspora, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, Nicaragua, you will very seldom hear them say anything about St. Vincent. They would say Urume, Wagera. That's Urume is our home. That's where we are from. Now, years after that history was being taught in schools, it has now been confirmed that Columbus never did visit St. Vincent, because the day when they said he landed in St. Vincent, he was in Spain. So that's a good example of a lie. I want to get back to the slave ship story again. I visited St. Vincent in 2015. And before I even landed, I looked at the terrain. It's very mountainous, a lot of lake. I said, man, this is a very hard place to take. I'm a military person as well, so I know about terrain and things of that sort. And when I landed in St. Vincent, a couple of days after, we took a taxi boat to go to Balisao, the island where we were interned before we were deported to Rotan, which I will talk about later. And I can tell you that the water is very deep and the waves are as high as the high rises we have here in Manhattan. So imagine that you have a ship carrying slaves. Their hands are chained, their legs are chained, their necks are chained. And then this ship happened to sink in this deep water. How in the world will they be able to swim ashore to rescue themselves? That's not possible. So please, let us use common sense and reasoning here before we just happen to agree with all this, what I call lies that have been written. And there is a research that was done by Professor Nancy Gonzalez. May she rest in peace. Nancy Gonzalez, in my opinion, has written the best book that I read on my Garifuna people. And it was after I read this book that encouraged me and motivated me to continue to do more history, more research, and more reading. The name of this book is Sojourners of the Caribbean, Ethnogenesis and Ethnohistory of the Garifuna. A very good book. And by the way, this book is at sale on AmazonBooks.com, and it's not expensive. She wrote other books on the Garifuna people. She wrote like 3 different books. Another good book that she wrote is The Household Structures of the Garifuna People. The language takes time for people to learn. The Garifuna language is, the root of the Garifuna language is mostly Arawak, mixed with a little bit of French. There is no African in the Garifuna language. So they had to have been on the island for a lengthy period of time. Dr. Forbes, who is a professor of anthropology, also wrote a book. She's now at University of North Carolina. And her book is about Garifuna language. And there are other books that you will find to support that there had to have been a length of stay over a period of time for the language to have developed among the Garifuna people. Our religion, Dogo, is African. The root of our religion is African. So we have to look at the different ethnic groups from West Africa that we came from. It could be several ethnic groups, and I'll say why. A study was conducted on which country in Latin America and the Caribbean had the most African ethnic groups. When that study was completed, it happened to have been Brazil. But that makes a lot of sense because in 1494, when they signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, that was a treaty that was signed by Spain and Portugal after Columbus landed in the Bahamas in 1492. What happened is that Columbus had gone to King John of Portugal to finance his voyage to this part of the world, but the Pope denied him. I mean, the king denied him. So when the king denied him, he went to the Queen of Spain, Isabella, and the King Ferdinand, and the two of them financed his journey. And then when he landed in the Bahamas, all the territories was given to Spain. Now the Portuguese got mad because when they heard that the Spanish were giving gold, they said, look, we need some gold too. So they protested to the Pope, and the Pope said, I'm going to mediate the conflict because you two are Catholics and we don't want you guys to go to war. So he divided the world in two. Anything in the east goes to Spain, anything in the west from that line is called the Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494. The only land that was given to Portugal was Brazil. Everything else from this tip of South America to the north went to Spain. And Spain came in with their troops called the conquistadors. And they started to occupy territories, and they installed a governor in their territories, and they started to slaughter the native indigenous people that they found. When they came, they had priests with them coming into these people's land and doing all these genocidal acts. They set up what we call the captaincy generals in Spain, La Plata, Granados. All these captaincy generals that they set up was their own administrative way of governing. Now, St. Vincent Garifuna people did not go for it. The Kalinogos did not go for it either. They fought against the French. And the French signed a treaty with them in 1666, giving them rights to all their lands in the Lesser Antilles. But what is going to happen? The French will go to war with the British. And the British will defeat the French. And when they defeated the French still turn around and give the lands to the British. And the Garifuna and the Kalinago people said, no, wait a minute. You already signed a treaty acknowledging our rights to our land. We're not going to give up our land. We're not going to subject ourselves to you all. So they had the first Carib War, which started from 1773. There was fighting taking place. And the British were unable to take over the island. Fighting just kept going on. Now, while the Kalinago and the Garifuna people were fighting for their land, there was a big war taking place in the United States. Very important war. And that war impacted on a lot of different countries in the world. It was the war when the French and Indians signed an alliance, because the French promised these native Indians in the United States that if you fight for us and we defeat the British, we are going to give you back all the lands that the British took away from you. It's called the French and Indian War. But the British defeated the French and the Indians. And that was the end of the French. The French got so disappointed that they're going to end up losing the war against the Haitians, which will lead to the Haitian independence in 1840. They had a whole territory of Louisiana, which they sold to the United States for $6 an acre. And when they signed that treaty, the only territory that was remaining for the French was the province of Quebec in Canada. But the British took everything. Islands like Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada, St. Vincent, and all those places, the British now will come and they will sign the first Treaty of Paris in 1763. That 1763 treaty made the British felt that they would be able to take people's land as they please. Now, when did the British actually take over St. Vincent? Well, the true date would be in 1797, because even up until 1796, there was still fighting taking place on the island of St. Vincent. Garifuna people and Kalinga were resisting. There is evidence that during a war in 1796, after our King Chatier was allegedly killed in 1795, some people escaped to St. Lucia and Grenada, which are neighboring islands to St. Vincent. The British brought in additional troops and they moved those people on several military vessels to England, and they were imprisoned in Portsmouth Castle in England. We know that the only prisoner exchange that took place were the French troops that were captured. But up to this day, we don't know about the Kalinago and the Garifuna people that were taken to England and were imprisoned in Portsmouth Castle. Now, in that same year, 1796, some Garifuna people were rounded up. They were taken to Dorchester Hill, which was a fort. There, they were interrogated. They were tortured. They were imprisoned. Possibly some were killed and thrown into the sea, because the fort is a high mountain. There's a lot of cells downstairs, prison cells. There are gates, you cannot get inside. The cannons are turned towards the land to stop the people from attacking the British troops, and vessels can dock right beside the fort in the Dorchester Hill. And then they removed approximately 5,000 of our people to the island of Balisao. Balisao is a barren island. There is nothing there. There is no water to drink. There is no fertile soil. They moved them there and they had them in prison. There is evidence that 1,000 of them were shot and killed a couple weeks after they got there. And then they were buried on the island. And the remainder of those people that survived number around 2,500 people. King George III of England and his governor of St. Vincent, just like the French, they had plans to move the Kalinago and the Garifuna people from the island of St. Vincent many years before it happened. And why were they determined to move the Kalinago, but more the Garifuna people? I'll tell you why. Off the mainland of St. Vincent, there are a group of islands numbering about 36 islands called the Grenadines. When the French and the British brought slaves from Africa, they would trap them and let them stay on these islands until they get word where to transport these slaves. The Garifuna and the Kalinago people would go and steal these slaves and bring them on the island of St. Vincent to live with them, because they didn't want to see nobody being enslaved. They were against slavery. And they were afraid that the more these people take slaves, the more they are going to be threatened, and they want to build their strength. So they brought them into the Garifuna culture. They learned the language, they live among the people, and they defended and they started fighting. Whenever the slaves got away from the French or the British, they would come and live with them. When the British took over the island of St. Vincent in around 1797, they moved the Kalinago people up into the north, isolated them from their mainstream Kingston area, took away all their fertile land, and they brought slaves on the island of St. Vincent for the first time. Commercial slavery started in the island of St. Vincent. So St. Vincent is on record as the last island in the Caribbean where slaves were brought for commercial purposes. the British thought that it was time for the Garifuna people to go. So on March the 11th, 1797, they brought 11 naval vessels from Great Britain. They loaded all the remaining Garifuna people that were on the island of Balisao in prison. And then they went to Bequia. And from Bequia, they sailed to a British colony that they were also squatting by the name of Rotan, Honduras, which is now a part of Honduras, but at that time it was Spanish territory. And they did not see Rotan and the Bay Islands to Honduras until around 1859 when they signed the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. That was a treaty that was signed between the United States and Great Britain to end British colonialism in the region. So the British gave up the Bay Islands, they gave up the Mosquito Coast, and in that subsequent treaty, 1859, they had the Anglo-Guatemalan Treaty, where Guatemala gave up their land from the Sarastun River to the Sabun River. Prior to that treaty, that was still considered Spanish territory because the British only had permission from the Spanish to cut logwood in Belize. They were never granted title to the land of Belize that we know today. Belize is from the Rio Hondo River to the Sarastun. And during Spanish administration, the governor in Quintana Roo was responsible for the whole northern part of Belize up until where the Great Sabun River is. And the governor from Peteng was responsible for the administration from Peteng up to that same point. After 1859 now, Belize was consolidated. And then later on, Mexico signed a border treaty with England. And the whole territory is what we know as Belize today. And the British granted Belize colony status in 1862. Now, when did the Garifuna people first move to the different countries? Well, we know that it could have been in the late 1798, 99, because the British brought a few of them to cut logwood and mahogany for them. And in 1801, 165 Garifuna people left Rotan and they came to Belize. They first landed in the Yarbrough area. We call that area Yarbrough. And then they did not like the canal water that is there. And they started moving southward to Manatee, Mullins River. And then they found the North Stank Creek River. They drank it, they loved it, and they settled there. That place is now known as Dangriga, where I'm from and many other people are from. Dangriga is the largest Garifuna community in the country of Belize, by the way. And from there, they moved to other places. There was a village in Dangriga, not too far from Commerce Bight area, by the name of Youngtown. That village was destroyed in a hurricane. So the Garifuna people moved from there to Ugada, which is now Hopkins. From there, they moved to St. Bight, Punta Negra, Barranco, Monkey River. And those are the settlements, the original settlements where the Garifuna people lived after they landed in the 1801 rush. There was a civil war taking place in Honduras in 1832. And because of the civil war, the Garifuna people were fighting for the nationalistas and on the other side as well. A group of Honduran soldiers came to the village of San Juan and they massacred some Garifuna men, women, and children. So after that massacre took place in 1832, Elio Beni and Satoye, two Garifuna leaders, they brought the largest contingent of Garifuna people to Dangriga. That was on the 19th of November, 1832. That day commemorates what we call today Garifuna Settlement Day in the entire country of Belize. It's now a public and bank holiday. The Hurricane Hattie hit Belize in 1961, October the 31st. And when the hurricane struck, it was a very severe hurricane. They were trying to move the Garifuna people from the coast, and they had two villages that were created. One was Silkgrass, and the other village was Georgetown. The Garifuna people didn't want to go to Silkgrass because there were too much battlas and sandflies were biting them, and they turned back to Dangriga. Georgetown, worse. It's too far away. There's no sea. So I don't think Georgetown got more than, in fact, in the 1960s, when I used to go to Georgetown, there was only one person living there, Mr. Lambert, him and his family. But maybe after a while, the population grew. But Silkgrass, why would somebody want to move from Hopkins to go to Silkgrass when they love the sea and the beach? A few Garifunas might go, but not too many. So Silkgrass don't have too many Garifuna. They didn't like the two places. But maybe now people might decide to go because land is becoming a rich commodity these days. Now, in 1801, when the Garifuna people lived in the southern part of Belize, they were autonomous. The British government had nothing to do with them. They took care of their communities, their land. They survived by doing fishing, farming, and trading. Because Garifuna people, they're used to farming, fishing, and trading. They have boats, they make boats. They go from one country to the other selling things. My great-grandfather, he was originally from a place in Honduras, and then he was back and forth between Dangriga and Triunfo de la Cruz, where he originally came from, which is in Honduras. That's the village where they kidnapped 5 young men last year, and up to this day, their whereabouts is unknown, because the Honduran government is known for committing atrocities and human rights violations against our people. It's still happening up to this day. It's also killing the Maya people. So, but in Honduras, when Honduras became a country around, I would say, 1823, because in 1821, when Simon Bolivar declared the Latin American countries independent, they formed the Central American Republic in Central America, but things weren't working out among them. Guatemala got too greedy. They wanted to take land away from Mexico. They went to war with Mexico. They went to war with El Salvador, and the nation fell apart. So these countries separated and they became independent again. So that was a second independence. Now, during this time, the Garifuna people their citizenship is undetermined because they were removed from the original country, which is St. Vincent. Honduras is not a country. Belize is not a country. None of those countries were countries. They were already there for 20 years without no citizenship. Then Belize, when did Belize get independence? 1981. That's so many years after. Citizenship was undetermined. They were autonomous. They had their lands. They worked their lands. Nobody bothered them. They were not allowed in Belize to cross the line to go on the northern side because there was a curfew that was put by the British that if they were seen on the other side of the border, they could be arrested. Why? Because at the time the British had slaves. The British didn't want the Garifuna people to intermingle with the Creoles who were at the time slaves, because that would probably lead to an insurrection. But there were slave rebellions in Belize, which we will talk about at a different time. There were slave rebellions in Rowan Creek. There were slave rebellions in Grace Rock Lagoon. So when you go to Belize school, they tell you, we had the best slavery out of all the Caribbean countries and other countries. Come on, what do you mean by best slavery? Slavery is not something nice. You take away a person from his home, his family, and you have him working for you for free for all these years and you don't compensate, and you won't call, but we had the best slavery in Belize? What kind of foolishness is that? Slavery is unjust, it's cruel, it's inhumane. It's wrong to take another person's freedom away from him or her. The Garifuna people now move from Belize. Some went to Livingston, where they started a settlement. But we know that the settlement in Livingston started by a Haitian warrior who ran away from Haiti, got land from Spain, and he settled in that area that we know as Livingston. And when Garifuna people came from Belize or from Honduras, they added to the settlement. In Honduras, they were given the land by Morrison for their fighting in the war, and they have title to their lands. So all the 40 something villages in Honduras, they have collective title for their land. But the problem is the lack of financing and the constant human rights violation that is committed against them by the government of Honduras. Nicaragua, they live in Bluefield, Orinoco, La Fe, and those settlements, they still have Garifuna people there. They have lost their culture, but they have land rights that was given to them by the new government, Ortega. Many Garifuna people, including myself, we have relatives in Nicaragua. My grandfather was born in Nicaragua from Bluefields. The guy Sambola, who came from Trujillo, Honduras, he founded the settlement that we know today as Orinoco. There are also some mosquitoes in that region. They are black, like the Garifuna, and they've been in the Americas for centuries. The other black group in Nicaragua, they were slaves that were brought from Jamaica to work in British plantations in the 1800s. Some of them moved from Nicaragua to Belize, and then we had some blacks moving from Rotan, Honduras to Belize as well. When they gave up the land to Honduras, they didn't want to be on the Spanish rule, so they just moved to Belize. What is the future of the Garifuna people in the diaspora countries and in their homeland, St. Vincent? The Garifuna people want to restore their rights to their land. They want to practice their culture freely. And they want to live in peace and harmony the way they lived before the Europeans came and disrupted their lives. This is the challenge that not only the Garifuna people face, all the indigenous people in the world are begging, they are appealing to the nations where they live. Please accept us as human beings. Give us our rights so that we can live our life freely like everybody else. But this is a problem because when the colonialists left the country, the neo-colonialists took over. These are children and grandchildren of the colonial masters, and they have that same mentality that these people are nothing there. We should be in charge. We should treat these people like they are nobody. And that is happening in Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Belize, all these countries. There's this race and class issue where the mistreatment of human beings go at will, and it never stops. And some of these people call themselves Christians, by the way. It is our responsibility as human beings to be a part of the movement to demand that justice be granted to every human being on this planet Earth. Because if we continue to commit injustice against people on this planet, there will always be war and there will never be peace. And we won't be able to live as human beings on the planet Earth among ourselves in peace and harmony. Thank you all very much. And it was a pleasure having you all today. And I have some more resources that is available. Whatever questions you have, I'm willing to answer those questions at this point.
Side quotation. I think he debunked a fact there. Some of us have been under the misconception that the Garinaga people from the moving on, we have Mr. Pacha, who will be doing published.
Your voice is breaking down. It's kind of breaking.
Good. Professor has this art is countless excellent of it in our Mandolin release. But did solution for and time just if of the whole topic of creating action or Garifuna is America and Guatemala, Honduras, and of course in Vincent, which we consider our land. So you all check out Amazon, just check for Wellington Ramos, and the book is available on Amazon 1999 and that add to your collection. The other book on a history of the United Democratic Party, UDP, in Belize and transition. And this one was recently done in 2020, and it has political party, the United Democratic Party, and it came to be in Belize. So if anybody who wants to know about a little bit of the history of the UDP, you know, I know they have a history of the PUP. Now they have in book form, and it was done by Professor Wellington Ramos. And but if you definitely want a copy of that book, you could definitely add that to your collection. It's also available on Amazon, and it's $19.99, and it will be available at the UWI Open Campus in our library. So anybody who would like to come and check those out, you could definitely come and do it here and visit our library, and we will definitely copy of those books could do and read and much knowledge as you want to on. So hopefully we them in the Caribbean, and so that other libraries will be able to have them as well. So thank you, Professor Upton, and I turn it back to our to Ms. Renisha.
Thank you, Pacha. Now, I don't know all of you, but as a science major here at the UA campus, I found Professor Ramos helpful because now have a situation where he was tying the origins and trial of people into a bit of politics. And that is all a very interesting conversation on any day of the week. That I would like to thank all of you for tuning in to the second University of the West Indian Campus public lecture. This was presented Sir Wellington Rob, and hosted by yours truly, Miss Ronisha Jensen. Until next time, stay safe and thank you for tuning in.